Hi guys and welcome. We're looking at human impact on water quality, food security and biodiversity. Quite a lot of work to do, but we're going to get through here. Just hang on with me and let me take you through this process. What are we actually looking at? Let's break that down firstly. We want to look at the effect of human activities on the quality of water. We spoke about the availability of water. Now we're looking at the quality of water and how do humans impact on this. We also want to identify the impact of solid waste and its disposal on the environment. When we're making all these waste products, where does it go to? And when it does go somewhere, what does it do to the environment? We also want to look at those factors that affect food security. Now, what the hell is food security? We need to think about that very carefully. When we get there, we'll discuss that. Lastly, we want to identify the loss of biodiversity due to human activities. In other words, you, and you. Yes, that's me as well. What are we doing to disturb or to affect the biodiversity in the environment? This is what we're looking at. Now let's carry on with the water quality firstly. Obviously, the quality of the water would also affect its availability. Look at that sentence. Quality of the water affects the availability. What does this mean? Water that is not contamination free, that means that is not free from contaminants, from waste, is too dangerous to use. So if it's too dangerous to use, then we can't use it. Simple as that. We can either use the water or we can't. The water is available or not available. Now, if the water is available and we can't use it, it's not available in real terms because we can't use it. If microorganisms get into the water supply, sanitation is affected and people are affected negatively. Lots of diseases, waterborne diseases are caused by this. Cholera being the more popular in our area. If human waste as well as detergents and soaps are not correctly disposed of, they may contaminate the water as well. Apart from microorganisms and the rest of it, we also have detergents. We are washing our bodies, we are washing our cars, we are washing our dishes. If we do not dispose of those correctly, they can also affect the quality of water. And water used for industrial purposes may also contaminate the water. How? First of all, the mining industry will release heavy metals into the water. Dangerous. Gold mining has led to large-scale water pollution in South Africa. Why? Mainly through acid mine drainage. This is causing a lot of pollution of water, especially in the water table across the land. The acidic waste water flows underground, contaminating the aquifers. Also, the use of paints, solvents and glue and the disposal of that into the water causes problems in the water. Just to show you some of the effects of mining on the water there. Look at this area of water. Look at the color of the water there. This is because this pipe coming from a mine activity is being deposited, substances are deposited into the water and this water is flowing then through. Also, we have oil spills from shipping and oil exploration activities in the sea, and look at the effect that can have. I don't have to say much, just looking at that picture, that shocking picture is enough to tell you the harms of oil spills in the sea. Water used for agriculture may also contaminate the water. So one was the industry, now we're looking at agriculture. First of all, when farmers use pesticides or herbicides, when they want to get rid of animal pests, pesticides, and plant pests, herbicides, herbs, when they're using the chemicals, pesticides is used to kill animal pests and herbicides is used to kill plant pests. When this happens, the pesticide or the herbicide may settle down onto the plant and on the soil, and when rain comes and washes off the surface of the soil, this may take the herbicide and the pesticide into the water, and that can cause problems. Fertilizer has the same effect. When the farmer adds fertilizer to the soil, this fertilizer, not all gets used up, but some of it remains on the topsoil, and when rain comes or when irrigation is taking place, the water runs off this fertilizer into the water body, and this causes problems. And one of the problems caused by especially the fertilizers that get into the water is known as eutrophication. Eutrophication. What is this concept? First of all, it is caused by pollution of water by fertilizers. And what does it do? The fertilizer causes a rapid growth of aquatic plants such as algae, the smaller plants. The increased amount of algae on the surface of the water blocks out sunlight. So we're forming a carpet on top of the water of this algae. So now the sun's rays cannot reach the plants at the bottom. And it prevents them from photosynthesizing. They won't carry out photosynthesis. These plants then die and begin to decompose. So when they die and decompose, this is going to increase microorganisms that feed on these decomposing dead plants. And the microorganisms then, because of the increase, start using up the oxygen in the water. And now the water is depleted of oxygen, and fish and other aquatic organisms will die due to oxygen shortage. So it's a chain reaction. Let's see how that looks in picture. There's all the story there, blocking the sunlight from reaching there. These plants at the bottom, they will die. And the microorganisms, the plants die, as you can see, and they start decaying because microorganisms come in that area to cause the decay. These microorganisms then use the oxygen. So the oxygen then is depleted in the water body, and the animals then will also die. This eutrophication, when we talk of the algae growing, we say it's called algal bloom. Algal bloom or algae bloom, where there's a very, a pushed growth in the amount of algae that we have there. Still on water quality, thermal pollution. What does this mean? Thermal, obviously you should know, deals with temperature. So refers to an increase in the temperature of rivers, streams, lakes and groundwater. Why? As a result of release of hot water by industries. Most of the mining activities and other activities release hot water. Why? Because the water is being used to cool the machinery, and that water then gets warm, and that warm water then is released by this industry into the water, and therefore the temperature in the water rises. What does this do? It increases dissolved oxygen in the water, it decreases dissolved oxygen in the water. This obviously has the same effect as we spoke about earlier. It creates anaerobic conditions in deep sea water. Deep water? What does anaerobic means? Conditions without oxygen. So lots of bacteria then can grow in that time as well. Algae in the water grows more quickly, resulting in algal bloom, and this will obviously lead to what we said earlier about eutrophication. Same story. We don't have to go into the details again. It's the same story there. So you must also understand that these things are not on their own. They are all interconnected. So one thing can lead to other things that are also there that we've discussed earlier as well. It then also raises the metabolic rate of the aquatic animals. Then this causes them to require more food. So that means they're going to eat up more food, the resources will be depleted quicker, and they will die. And here's a result of this algal bloom type of thing happening. The fish get caught. Their lack of oxygen, they can get caught even, and their gills can get damaged because of the algae, etc. But more importantly, it's the lack of oxygen that causes them to die. Did you know that 25% of clean household water, the water that comes into your house from the municipality, the pipe comes in and this pipe then comes to your house. Out of that water, 25% of that water, what do you think happens to it? Is used to flush toilets. So 25% of the clean, purified water that we are getting, we are flushing it down the pan. So that's something to think about. Why must we purify water? Talking about purification, why must we purify water and why must we recycle water? Recycle is easier to talk about because the recycling will tell you that obviously there's a shortage of water. Water is a precious commodity and we need to conserve water. And if we do not conserve this water, we will be running short of the water. So if we can recycle water in certain ways to water our gardens, to wash our cars, and all the other things that we use water for apart from drinking and washing our bodies, if we can recycle water to use for those activities, then obviously we would have more water, pure water available for us. So poor quality leads to a number of waterborne diseases and deaths. We know this already. So we don't want poor quality water. So what must we do? We must provide clean supply of drinking water. When we open the tap, guys, and we must be proud, we must be proudly South African in a sense that of many countries that we visit, it's one of the countries that we can still open the tap and drink water from there, despite the big mushroom in the bottled water industry as well. There are people that prefer to drink bottled water. But you and I, we're drinking water from our taps and we are perfectly healthy, nothing's happening to us, etc. So we should be fortunate and we should be thankful that we still have that opportunity. Many countries, even first world countries, have to, not by choice, but they have to drink only bottled water. Where is this water cleaned? It is done in water treatment works. The disinfectant used is chlorine. In South Africa, we use chlorine to clean the water. The water is then filtered to remove particles. The water is then tested and pumped to a reservoir. So this whole thing must happen before that water gets to the reservoir. Once it gets to the reservoir, it then gets pumped through the municipal pipes to the home. So your house is connected via the municipal pipes to the reservoir. So if we look at a diagram like this, if this is the intake of the water coming in here, this water goes through various lots of other things here that's happening here. There's a chemical addition stage where there's lime, alum, mixing of the water, etc. Water carries on going through there. Then it goes through sedimentation where this water will go through rocks, etc., etc. So the particles are removed from the water, and then finally it's going through here the process of filtration, where if there's still some small particles left in the water is cleaned of these particles, and then chlorine finally is added at that juncture there to purify the water further, to disinfect the water rather, and the water then goes to the reservoir or the storage from there into. From there, it will go to be distributed to all parts of the town or the city or wherever else. So it's a process that takes place. Let's look at our first question for today. Explain how alien plants like water hyacinth affects our water bodies. First of all, there's two things that are happening here. Something about plants and affecting the water bodies, and something about not just plants but alien. So we need to explain this term alien. Alien means not from here. And in our context, we mean not from South Africa. If it was from South Africa, then it would be indigenous. So an organism is either indigenous, that means it is hailing from this area, or it's exotic or alien. That means it's coming from somewhere else. It's been imported from somewhere else. So we're talking about alien plants and how they affect our water bodies. And here's an example here, the water hyacinth in the Vaal Dam or the water hyacinth in the Hartepeersput Dam that we hear so much about. Now, how does this affect? As we can see, the plant, because it's an alien, it generally has less requirements in certain aspects than the indigenous plants. In other words, this plant is coming from maybe a harsher climate. So that climate was very harsh. So the plant is developed to survive those harsh conditions. Now we're taking the same plant and we're putting it in a less harsh climate, where our indigenous plants were used to this particular environment. And this particular environment is taxing for them. So it has it's controlled in terms of the population. So, but because they flourish more here, that means there's very little limiting factors for this plant, and it outcompetes indigenous plants. And when it does that, it's going to flourish, and therefore we're having this situation here where it is forming a layer on the water surface. This is now the answer actually from here. That's an explanation of what we're talking. Layer on the water surface. So this again, we're going to come back to the same thing like algal bloom. It's going to block out sunlight for plants below. That's one story. So those plants will die and so on and so on. That's another problem. In addition to that, it also forms an obstacle for aquatic animals. In other words, as they're swimming, fish that is mainly, as they're swimming, they may get caught in the growth of the plant. And therefore they may die because of that, because they cannot swim, because the fin is caught or something is caught in between and so on. So it causes a problem. It also affects people that fish in those places, etc., etc., etc. Second question. The graph below shows the effect of different amounts of sewage discharged into a river. We were talking about how man's impact on the water. So this is a continuation of that. On the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water. Study the graph and answer the questions that follow. Now, typical graph data response question. You need to look at the graph. You need to read it. Graph showing the effect of pollution on the amount of oxygen dissolved in the water. On the y-axis, dissolved oxygen in arbitrary units. And on the x-axis, distance downstream. That means this is at a particular point, and this is further downstream as we're going down. Also arbitrary units. Here we see mild pollution, one line, quite heavy pollution, and very heavy pollution. The first question says, why does the sewage discharge cause oxygen levels to decrease? And we can see this happening in the graph. At this point, the sewage enters the water. Immediately, you can see in all three cases, the oxygen has decreased. In the very heavy pollution, obviously, the oxygen decreased the most. But in all cases, the oxygen decreased. They want to know why is this so. The sewage contains nutrients that bacteria use, and as they use these nutrients, they deplete the oxygen in the water. So the nutrients is coming into the bacteria, and therefore they're having more available nutrients, therefore their metabolic rate will increase and they will use more oxygen. And at the same time, because there's so much nutrients, the bacterial population itself will also grow. And because it grows, there's a greater demand in oxygen. And that's why the oxygen will be depleted. The next question says, why does the minimum amount of oxygen occur some distance downstream of the point of sewage discharge? What are they talking about? The minimum oxygen is about there. there, there, there. It is not exactly where the sewage was found. It is further down. This is where the sewage is found, and look at where the oxygen is at its lowest. So it's a distance away from there. Why? They want to know. And the answer is that this is when the bacteria have used up all the available oxygen as they use nutrients in the sewage. In other words, the bacteria start using the oxygen. They don't use all at one time here. They're using and they're using more until it comes right down to the bare minimum of oxygen that's left there. That's what we mean in that answer there. The next question says, why does the level of dissolved oxygen in the river then increase further downstream? This is obvious because the bacteria are no longer active and the water is naturally aerated as it travels downstream. The water, remember, you're not going to see that in a graph, but if you're looking at a stream and you need to picture a stream in your mind, as the stream is moving, it's going to be naturally interacting with the air. And the air would then add oxygen to the stream as it moves further away from the bacteria and further away from the sewage that was dumped in there. Give two possible reasons why sewage would be discharged into river systems in a developing urban environment. The answer there is overflow from overuse of existing systems, because we are expanding all the time and therefore developing, and there's more and more houses, more and more industries mushrooming, and they will then cause problems there. And at the same time, while that is happening, this is where we're falling short. There's no new sewage systems putting in place. So we're developing, we're making more industries, but we are not developing the sewage. The development of the industry and the development of the houses is going there, but the sewage development is going there. It's staying at the same point. So we are getting more to use the same amount that we were using before. So therefore, sewage can be then deposited straight into the river because of that. Name one positive and one negative. Listen to this question carefully. Name one positive and one negative effect that quite heavy pollution could have on a rural farming community living at point X down the river. Here's point X here. So there's a rural area here, quite heavy pollution. There's, oh sorry, not this one. Let's take that out. We're talking about quite heavy pollution, this one. There, okay? If they're living in this area here, how does this affect them? A positive is there would be nutrients for their crops. The negative is it causes diseases for them. So here's our problems that we need to look at. Okay, that brings us to the end of the questions. We move on to solid waste disposal. First of all, I must explain this because lots of learners, when you ask them this, they have no clue. Solid waste means the waste that we are getting rid of in our daily lives from our consumption, from production of other things, whatever it may be. There's always some form of waste that comes out of it. And solid waste is what we see here. This is solid waste. Liquid we've spoken about in the sewage and in the water. Now we're talking about solid waste. All these things like paper, like tin, like glass, etc. We must obviously at this juncture separate solid waste. There's one factor that doesn't go there. Any solid waste that has nuclear capabilities, that has radiation capabilities, is not part of this definition. Now, this alone tells you the problem here, and this is a preview of what we're going to talk about later as well. We're going to call this something else later. Can you see that the waste is dumped above the ground in both instances here? any waste in your dustbin that can be reused by somebody else, recycled or repaired, should not be there. Simple as that. That's where it starts, you and me. It starts there by us. Anything that we can reuse, we can recycle, or it can be repaired for use, should not be in the dustbin. Any nutrients and resources being taken out of the system and buried in a landfill or burnt are resources lost to us. It's gone. We can't use it again. And we know that resources are scarce, so we need to be taking care of them. Some important stats now. To produce 1 ton of paper, and you must know how much of tons of paper we produce just for your notes, for your textbooks, for exams, etc. Let's not look at the other parts of the industry, just at schools. 100 tons of water is used. 100 tons of water. For every liter of beer, 10 liters of water have been used in the fermenting process. So although you're only getting 1 liter, 10 liters of water was used in the manufacture of that beer. Producing 1 cell phone requires 75 kilograms. That's more than my body weight. That's more than my body weight of resources. A toothbrush, a simple thing like a toothbrush, requires 1.5 kilograms of resources. That is coal, oil, and water for its production. So what are we highlighting here? We are highlighting what we need from the environment every time we manufacture things. And that is related to that and that. Do not throw away unnecessary whatever that you are considered as waste. So where does all this waste go for? First of all, our solid waste. Most of our solid waste will go into the dustbin, hopefully. Many of us throw it anywhere, outside in a park, in a river, wherever. But generally, municipalities have organized, they've sold you bins, you're paying for the bins, or you bought your own bin, and you put them in the bin there. And mainly, the responsibility of dealing with this waste thereafter is solely on the municipality. You're getting paid, you're paying for that service, but they have to do it. So solid waste then, the municipality then will take that and fill dongas, and valleys. And generally they will be covered with soil to form landfill sites. So in other words, in this particular case, there was an indentation, and we are filling that area and we're covering it up with soil. And this then forms what we call a landfill site. However, because of the demand, increasing waste being produced, we using a lot of things, and we just looked at the stats for small things, and the demand for those small things have increased, and therefore we need to, we produce much more waste. And because of that, waste are now being dumped on the surface of the land, forming dump sites. And where did you see that? There we go. Surface of the land. This is above the surface. It's not below the surface. It's not in a donga. It's not in a valley. It's above the ground. It is not covered with soil. So this is a dump site. That's the difference between a dump site and a landfill. Now, what about managing these things? Let's look at how we can manage landfill. First of all, a lot of methane is given off by landfill sites. And if this methane is collected and used in all of these activities to provide lighting, provide electricity, providing other forms of energy for households, for industry, etc., then at least the methane gas is not wasted here. So that's what we're talking about there, methane gas from landfill sites converted to energy. We must also now start looking at rehabilitating dump sites. How can we do this? First of all, physical cleaning. We have to go there and clean it, sort out What is metal, what is plastic, what is paper, what can be recycled, what can be reused, etc. And then distribute it that way. This in itself, government is stimulating a whole industry around us. Many government initiatives have motivated people without jobs to start small-scale businesses to deal with the physical cleaning, sorting, recycling, distributing material found in the dump site. We can also cover it with sand, cover the dump site with sand so everything is under, it will decompose under that so it won't cause problems. And phytoremediation. Phytoremediation. Remediation you'll know, to fix. What we mean by fix here, to remove toxins, poisons in the dump site. Phyto, using plants. So what happens here is that plants are planted in this area and they remove the toxins from the environment, and sometimes they release chemicals into the soil which will make the toxins harmless. This is known as phytoremediation. Now, still on the disposal. Rather than getting to that stage of disposal of the solid waste, what about recycling, reusing, and reducing? These three big R's in environment. Reuse, I would say first. Whatever you can reuse, reuse it. Or before even reusing, sorry. I would say reduce. So if your, remember we spoke about carbon footprint in earlier discussions. If you reduce your carbon footprint, that means you are reducing your demand for material. And if you're reducing your demand for material, you are reducing the amount of waste you produce. And if you reduce the amount of waste you produce, less waste, firstly. Apart from that, if you're still using, then let's reuse. For example, a worksheet may be printed on one side only. Why don't we use the other side for something else? So we are reusing something. Your book, you are writing your book, half the book is not used. You simply throw that away. What about those other pages? Can't we use it somewhere else? Think about that. And obviously, recycle. Even after that book is completed and it's full and you don't need it anymore, at least let's not leave it in a dump site or a landfill. Let's give it to paper guys who will recycle that to manufacture more books with the same thing. Today we're talking of recycled paper used to make toilet roll, to make writing material, etc., etc., etc. So one of the benefits of this recycling and reusing and reducing, it slows down the use of the world's non-renewable and renewable resources. It reduces energy costs in manufacturing of cold containers, packaging, etc. For example, the glass that we drink cold drink from, or a can that we're drinking cold drink from, now if the manufacturer gets this thing back, then his cost to remake the same thing has been reduced because the container is already there. So there we're reducing that as well. It saves water because we told you earlier how much of water it takes to manufacture half of these things. It reduces the amount of waste going into landfill sites, saving airspace. We spoke about that just now. It creates jobs and money for schools and organizations. Creates jobs, and it can create money for schools. For example, your school can get involved in a recycling project and therefore get some income from the used paper that you've used. Big, reducing pollution and litter. It saves raw material that we can cover earlier. It reduces the need to import raw, expensive raw materials. When we need to bring things in, we have it already at our disposal. Why must we then get all that going through? Let's take one question. This is a lot of reading involved in this question, so we need to go through carefully. Read through the following text and then answer the questions that follow. An ever-growing economy, expanding population, rapid increase in visitor numbers, and unsustainable consumption patterns are all contributing to Cape Town's significant waste problem. Now, this text is in your notes, so you can refer to the text, and we're not going to read the whole passage. We're going to move straight to the questions. It's a long passage. They say, and obviously most of your answers will come from the passage, but some of it is also quite general, so we can talk it through. First one says, much of the waste that is deposited on landfills has further uses, and many people live on and around these landfill sites to collect these items. Like I said, apart from the government initiatives, ordinary people that have no job, they're going to these landfill sites, and they have made the small industry to survive. Not an industry, you can't even call it an industry, you talk of a survival strategy. Say, list 3 possible dangers to the health of the people who live in this environment. They're living in that environment, they're sleeping, eating, drinking, they're living in that environment, right? Like I say, we can go to the text, but this is also general knowledge. Exposure to poisonous chemicals in the waste. There could be lead, mercury, arsenic, etc. in the waste. Increased possibility of exposure to disease-carrying organisms in the waste. Because, and your examples are tetanus, typhoid, dysentery, etc. What's happening here is, because the waste is waste, it attracts lots of microorganisms, and these microorganisms will carry with them these diseases. There's also an increased risk of lung diseases when present on landfills during burning. When they are burning the waste products, incineration, by the way, is another word for saying we are burning the solid waste. When that happens, person can get lung infections because of that. Landfills are known to cause pollution of the environment. Briefly describe 2 possible ways in which this could happen. Firstly, in a landfill, there could be littering when the wind blows plastic bags away from the landslide into the surrounding areas. Secondly, the risk of groundwater pollution due to chemicals draining through the bottom of the landfills when it rains. In other words, the chemicals are seeping down into the water table at the bottom, so the chemicals are getting in there. Air pollution resulting from waste being burnt on the landfills. When we burn them, there's air pollution taking place. So these are the harms of having a landfill site. Give one way in which lower income households could reduce the amount of waste that they send to landfills. That's easy. For a start, they could have compost heaps rather than throwing away the organic waste. All we're talking about now from the households. We're not talking about cartridges and the rest of it. We're talking about food stuff, etc., that we do not use in our houses. This could be, we can open up a little pit at home and throw all these things in there, and this will then decompose on its own and form compost, which obviously we know we will use as fertilizer for our plants in the garden. In that way, we will make a difference. But it starts where? It starts here. Here in your own heart, yours, and my heart. We need to start making the small differences. If each of us makes one small difference every day, this will grow to be a way of the future where we can be proud that we are taking care of our heritage from the environment. With that, I think that's a whole more than a mouthful. You take a break. Hi guys, and welcome back. I'm hoping you had a nice little break, and I'm hoping you revitalized, and let's move on with this program of ours. In terms of this big word, food security. Let's break it out. Food, I can't explain to you and myself anything more about food than needs to be said. Right? Something we can't stay away from. But the word security also, if you're living in South Africa, you should know this word security. It's on the buzzword. Every day we're talking about safety and security. So when we're talking about food security, we're talking about the safety of food supply so that we can sustain the food supply for a long period of time. It's built on 3 pillars. And these 3 pillars are access, first of all. Access to gain, to get, and to have sufficient resources to obtain appropriate foods for a nutritious diet. In other words, when we say this access, now for you and me that have the access of watching this program on TV, then this access that we're talking about on food is foreign. Because when we say access, of course, we have food. You and I, we can go to the fridge during our break in between and have a snack. But many people in the country do not have access to sufficient amount of food. And this is what we are talking about. When we're talking about food access, we mean that food must be available to all people in the country and all people globally. That's the first one. The second one is the use of food. First of all, and that's where you and I will have to come in greatly, because we must use food appropriately. How does this work? You've studied nutrition. You've studied respiration. You've studied your body. And therefore, you should have a basic knowledge about nutrition and care. What is the right type of food to eat? How this food will help you in your body, etc. What is a balanced diet, etc. So you need the basic knowledge. Not everybody has access to education, remember that. So we, as a country, must go out there and make people aware of what is correct to eat and what is the correct diet, etc. As well as provide them with adequate water and sanitation. This is also important. And we've discussed sanitation before. All right. And sorry, we must have one, food availability. Sufficient of food must be available on a regular, consistent basis. In other words, we can't give somebody 10 tons of rice today, and then for the next 3 years, we don't give them anything. It must be regular, it must be consistent. So again, just to recap, food availability, food access, to gain access to food, and the use of food is important. Now we look at the factors that contribute to food insecurity. In other words, those factors that make food unavailable, insecure, not good for us, etc. These are one of the things that people talk about a lot these days is the human population explosion. In other words, the rising population. And obviously this creates a demand for more food. Droughts and floods, poor farming practices, invasive alien plants. And by now, guys, you should realize that we have covered many of these in the previous section before your break. We've touched on these things, but we want to look at these same aspects and how they lean towards food insecurity. GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, and wastage. And again, here we are guilty. We are guilty all the time on wastage. People do not have money to buy milk, yet we will leave lots of milk in our cereal bowls without finishing. We'll eat the cornflakes and we'll leave the milk behind, whereas other people are scrounging bins, dustbins, and landfill sites looking for food. Let's look at the first factor, and that is the human population explosion. Look at this graph. And we're starting with 1750. Prior to 1750, when the first census was taken, all population, human population prior to 1750 is based on estimates. And you've covered this section under determining population size, the methods used to determine population size. So from 1750 onwards, we have the census and we have the size of the population. Now notice in this graph, there are two different aspects, and there's a key provided. And again, here's something for you to remember when you're drawing a graph. If you are using 2 lines or 3 line graphs on a single set of axes, you must show a key, or you simply label each line such that the person that reads this information gets to read it very easily. He mustn't figure out which is what. The blue here is developing countries, and the orange, I may say slightly orange, pale brown, industrialized countries. Now look at the population growth in the industrialized countries there, going up that way, and compare that to the developing countries going that way. And look at the units given on the y-axis. There we have the units there in billions. Remember, this graph is not drawn to scale. This is not usual practice the way we're doing it here, but in this graph we are allowing that to go through. So the human population in developing countries especially has risen from 1 billion, roughly 1 billion in 1750 to, and the projection by 2050 would be plus minus 10 billion. So the projection up to 2050 is tenfold. The population would have increased 10 times its size when it was in 1750. And again, this is due to mainly to advances in medical technology, advances in technology as a whole, in terms of that you can refrigerate your food, you can have access to more food, the hunting practices has improved, and so on. So people have more access to food in that sense. So these are some of the reasons that cause this population explosion. Whereas in the industrialized country, where they are more conscious about the size of the population, and there may be laws and space constraints, etc., that has reduced the population explosion. But nonetheless, even there, it was very, you can say, 0.2 billion in 1750 and projected to be just slightly over a billion, 1.25 billion in 2050. So there is quite a significant increase there as well. And obviously, an increase in the population, more mouths to feed, increase the demand for food. The next point we had in our factors that impact on food insecurity is droughts and floods. Where we have, in cases where summer rainfall reduces for some reason or the other, because of climate change, etc., the summer rainfall in certain areas, especially in South Africa, in the northern part of the country especially, we have a problem sometimes when there's no rain or very little rain in the summer months when we expect the rain. And this then will create a pressure on the water resources, leading to drought. And if there's drought, then obviously the crops won't grow, the animals will die, etc. So your food security is threatened. It means you're going to have less food. The other will also happen if we have flood risks, whether it is because of the climate change and melting of the, because of the greenhouse effect and rise in the global temperature, melting of the ice caps, and this creates a pressure of more water in the water system, and this in turn, and with that goes with the hurricanes and the typhoons and the tsunamis, etc., that create havoc, and that then can destroy crops, can destroy homes, and that also has problems in terms of food. And when there's flood, remember, lots of disease can be spread in that time when the flood is in full force in an area, especially if it's for a long period of time. Waterborne diseases are rife, food gets contaminated, people eat the contaminated food, and they can be threatened. So remember, it's not only about the availability of food. The food that you have must be edible. It must be free of microbes. It must be free of microorganisms and disease. So that is when you can use it. Otherwise, it's no sense having tons of food that you can't use. The next point is poor farming practices. And here again, the first and the most prominent feature in this is either incorrect plowing methods or this one here called monoculture. Monoculture means that the farmer plants the same crop in the same area over and over again, year in, year out. He's planting the same crops in the same area. First of all, it limits the variety of the different habitats. it also has a high risk strategy since the crop may fail. If this particular crop that you are depending on fails, what then? You know, if you are an investor and if you are investing money and you take all your money and you invest it in a particular stock at the stock exchange, and if that stock crashes, your history, your entire savings for your life is gone. So what will a stockbroker advise you? He will advise you to spread your risk. That means put your money in several different equities or different options, so that if the one fails, the other one will cover. At least you have some security. Now, in the same way, if the farmers plant several different crops, if the one fails, at least the other yield can pull them out of the doldrums, as so to speak. Okay, so a pest or disease, if it harms that crop, it's going to go helter-skelter, because that pest gets used to that particular crop, and there are no other animals maybe coming in that area because they don't have a need for this particular plant or this vegetation. So that pest thrives. There's no natural enemy, so it's going to rise in population and mesmerize the crops, and that way you're going to have a problem. And with that, it's also likely to result in reduced soil quality. Why? Because the same crop will be utilizing the same minerals. It has the same requirements year in and year out. So from the soil, this particular crop is extracting the same minerals all the time. Whereas if you rotate your crops, crop rotation, different crops will have different requirements, and in that way, the soil has time to recover. Even though we are adding artificial fertilizers, in fact, if we're using this artificial fertilizers, this can create, as we've seen earlier, more problems, because if that runs off into the water, we can have eutrophication, etc., etc. We're not going to go into that now. And it may contribute to soil erosion as well. So that's the story there. Again, something we've looked at before, invasive alien plants. These are planting plants in areas, in our country, for example, which are not indigenous. Indigenous, another big word, indigenous. That will be the opposite to alien. Alien, not arising from this country, from this area. Indigenous, from naturally growing in our case, in South Africa. So pine trees like these that have been imported from Europe and other areas have been brought into our countries. And we can have other plants as well coming in there, these types of plants here coming in. Now, because of this, these plants thrive better in our habitat, because they come from habitats which are a little bit more harsh. That means it's colder, lots of snow, etc. And in South Africa, that harsh climate is not here. So this is a very hardy plant. It can survive extreme temperatures. Now we're putting it in an area where there's no extreme temperature, and therefore it's going to outcompete our plants, and therefore it's going to outcompete them and push them out. And in this way, our plants, the indigenous plants, are threatened. And in addition to that, these plants have a very high water. If they were humans, we would say they're very thirsty plants. They have a very high water requirement. So they guzzle lots of water, and that creates problems for us as well. So we need to get rid of them. Last one is, or not last one, loss of wild plant varieties. Again, here now we have to talk of artificial selection. Farmers use artificial selection to select the desirable characteristics. And when they do that, they create what we would call the perfect plant. Not for the plant, not for the environment, but for us, for you and I. We want certain qualities. We want bigger fruit. We want nicer looking flowers. We want a plant that will resist pests, a plant that will resist drought, etc. So we create this perfect plant with genetic modification or genetic technology or biotechnology. And because of this, this plant is now better suited to the environment than the plant that was there naturally. So it outcompetes that plant, and we start losing the wild variety, the original natural plant that were there. So these ones come out, and we do not know. First of all, there's loss to them, and this now will narrow the gene pool. Now, this gene pool is not a swimming pool that you're going to swim in. No, Gene pool is the available genes in this environment. That will be known as the gene pool. And what has happened is we have narrowed that because we have killed off the wild varieties. Further than this, there's also a problem. We do not know what is the long-term effects of doing this, and we're going to come to that as well just now. And there we come. Remember these 2 points, the one we've done earlier, this one here, not that one, but this one, loss of wild varieties, and this one, they go together because the genetically modified organisms lead to the loss of wild varieties. And we've gone through that now. So desired genes are transferred from one plant to another to produce plants with the desirable characteristics. This may increase the yield and resistance of the plant, and they will outcompete. This assists in increasing food production because these are better plants. So the nature will not have its way with these plants. So we can get lots of food. But loss of wild varieties is one. So we're losing biodiversity. We're having less variety out there. And less variety is always not a good thing. The more variety we have out there, the better it is for the ecosystem and environment in general. And, as I said earlier, the long-term effects of interfering with nature, you and I don't know. We may only discover this much later. We won't even discover it. Our great-great-great-grandchildren may feel the effects of what we are doing today. So there's a fear of this happening and this negative impact. So those are some of the things we need to look at. And this last point now, wastage. It's really something that you and I have to take very seriously because tons of food is being wasted every day. So research indicates that one third, 33.3333% of the food that is produced globally is wasted. So we're making so much of food, but one third. So because of this wastage, it's estimated also in South Africa that 14% of the food bought, you and I go to the store, we buy food, 14% is thrown away. We eat a little bit, we throw the rest away, regularly. It's because we have this that, we have. And what's the difference? We can buy something tomorrow. We don't like this one here. It doesn't look so nice. Let's throw it away. We'll buy some. We're not thinking that out there are people that are starving. There are homes around our immediate neighborhood, number one, and in the surrounding disadvantaged areas where we could go. There are many, many, many places of shelter, places of looking after the elderly, looking after AIDS orphans, looking after sick people, right? Where we could find out where these places are, create a central point in our own towns, and then get somebody to take it there, adopt some of these areas, or start our own in our own areas, from your school. Start these initiatives, guys. It's no sense learning all the life science, all the maths, all the science, but you do not know how to be a good human being. Let's start at that level. It's what you and I do with this education. This is the purpose of these exercises, of this curriculum that you're getting. It must also guide you towards being a responsible citizen. And a responsible citizen will care for his neighbors. No religion tells you that you mustn't care for your neighbors. So we must get serious about this, and we must look at ways in which we can get this waste and distribute it to where it is necessary. Now, wastage can occur in all the stages. In the harvesting, while they're harvesting, they can waste because they may be picking some fall off. In the production, while we're producing food, some may be waste. The processing, the retail, and in the consumption. That means at the stores, some things that don't get sold are thrown away. There's certain stores in our country that they have a policy that if it's not sold by a particular date, then they have to get rid of it because they have a reputation to look after. And not all the food that has a sell-by date means that it's all bad after that. So those are some of the things we need to look into a little bit deeper so that we can design something. We can go to these stores and talk to them and say, listen, these things here, explore. Obviously, we have to find out the dangers, the hazards, etc. We separate the hazardous from the non-hazardous, and the non-hazardous can then be redistributed to places where they need them. We go straight to a question then, and guys, we need to read this question, and good that we've put this question here, because it's something that you need to consider, a type of question that can be related to the work that we are doing. And it relates to other work that we've done as well. The question that we are dealing with is an investigation question. Let's look at this question. The question says, the dying of trees due to acid rain is brought about by changes in the pH of the soil. Seppo observed the trees in his town were gradually dying. He decided to investigate the effect of acid rain on germinating bean seeds. So he wants to carry out. So he made an observation. He's thinking in his mind that the acid rain is causing these trees to die. So now what does he do? He has to investigate this hypothesis that's in his mind. So what did he do? He placed cotton wool on 6 sources. He poured a solution with a different pH from 2 to 7. 7, remember, is neutral, and anything below 7 is acidic. So 2 will be a strong acid. By the way, in nutrition you would have learned that the hydrochloric acid in your stomach has a pH of 2. And if we take that hydrochloric acid and we just drop it on your clothes, it will burn through your clothes, through your skin. But yet in the stomach, because of the mucus lining and alkaline that is deposited there, it does not harm the stomach too much. Again, it can cause ulcers and so on, which you have done under nutrition. He then placed 50 bean seeds onto the cotton wool in each saucer. He covered the seeds and left them on the shelf for a week. There's his result. Look at his table. So he decided to display his results on a table, on a pH of 2 to 7 and a number of germinating seeds. The independent variable generally goes on the on the first column or the left column, and the other one goes in the second column. So we can see there at page 3, 4, then 10, then 15, then 28, then 35. There is a trend that is very evident in this particular table. Name the independent variable in this investigation. Now, I've given that away already when I was explaining. That would be pH. Why is it pH? And what is this independent variable that we are talking about? The independent variable is the variable that the investigator can manipulate, can change. The investigator can change the pH, but he cannot change the number of seeds that will germinate. So the independent variable is the pH. The other way of looking at the same thing is, does pH affect the germinating of the seeds? And the answer has to be yes. Does the germinating of the seeds affect pH? The answer has to be no. So pH can stand on its own, it's independent. And the germinating, well, we'll come to that just now. There we go. Name the dependent variable in this investigation. There's only 2 variables in this one here. 1, 2. So the answer would be the number of germinating seeds. Remember, you're going to have to answer that in full as it appears there. Name 2 ways in which the investigation could be improved to obtain accurate and valid. This valid is the important part here. We must explain now the difference between validity and reliability. Reliability means that if we do this experiment again, or if somebody else had to do the same experiment, they must get more or less the same result. So in other words, it speaks to the repeatability. In other words, can we trust this result? Or was it a fluke? If we do an experiment once, we may get a result, but it may just have been luck or something that we didn't know we're doing in there that created this. But if we repeat it a few times and we get the same result, we say that we can trust it because it has been done over and over again, yielding the same result. So that's what reliability talks to. And validity, on the other one, talks of the correctness of the method. If you do anything wrong in the method, you're going to have problems. So let's go back to the question. Name 2 ways in which this investigation could get more valid reasons. So we have to look at the method, isn't it? So, first of all, they're talking about placing cotton wool on 6 sources, etc. They didn't talk about how much cotton wool. They didn't talk about the size of the sources. So, we would have to say they must use, first of all, the same amount of cotton wool. You'll notice when we're talking about validity, we will always talk about constants. And here, the word same is talking about that. We must also have the same size of saucer. What else can we talk about here? Let's see. So he poured a solution with different, they don't talk about the amount here. So the same amount of solution must be poured in each. All right, there. 50 bean seeds. Again, were they of the same size? Were they from the same packet? Or they were 50 from different packets? Because the quality of the bean seeds may be different. Some may be easy to germinate, others may not be. So we must use the same size bean seeds. We must use this from the same production line wherever we got the bean seeds, etc., and so on. So there's quite a bit there. We got about 4 there. They only needed 2. Describe the relationship between pH and the number of germinating seeds. This answer, when they're asking you for the trend, they could also say, describe the trend in this graph. You must always go back to the graph and look at the 2 variables. Again, it's pH and number of seeds. And we're looking at here. At 2, there was 0. At 3, 4, 10, 15, 28, 35. What can we see? As we're going up down this table, there's an increase in the number of seeds. But what's happening to pH? pH is rising. So our answer in a question like this, whether it's trend or relationship, we must start with as. As the pH rises, the number of seeds germinating also increases. Now, in this particular case, it was cut and dried. As they increase, sometimes what can happen, somewhere there, it goes to 28, then you get another 28 there, and you get another 28 there, and so on. And then you get 15 again, as you're going down. Now, in those cases, I'm going to undo that because we don't want that there. When that happens, that means it's not just straightforward that it's increasing all the time. That means at some stage, it has become constant, and it may have dropped. So when you're describing a graph like that, remember, you must then be specific. You don't have to be so specific that at 2 it was 0, at 3 it was 4, and so on. No, that's not what we're saying. Up to 7, it was increasing. Thereafter, it stayed constant for a while, and then started dropping, and you can give which pH this happened. And I'm using this particular table as an example. But the idea is when you are answering a question, that when there's changes as the trend is continuing, you must highlight those changes in your answer, so you're getting more marks. You'll see sometimes they give 6 marks for a question like that. Suggest 3 strategies that the government can use to help reduce the formation of acid rain. Now, what do we need to understand from this? First of all, strategies, that's easy. We need to know, where does this acid rain, where does it get its source from? The main source is from the emissions from the factories. So first of all, the government must educate the people, especially the industries, about the harm of emissions from their factory. Secondly, and I'm going to go down now, the government, because it's a government, can pass legislation. So one is education, the next one is legislation. So you're going to pass laws. You need to elaborate on this. To control what? Control the amount of emission from these factories. And if you make a law, it's no sense you say, you know what, everybody has to stop at a particular stop street, or everybody has to drive at 120, but there's nobody to monitor it. So the next point would be monitor. If nobody monitors it, then everybody's going to do whatever they please. So the government then must monitor that people or that industry comply with this. And what happens if they don't comply? Then they must impose fines for those that are non-compliant. That's now the law and the hard side of the law. We can also use the law and the government on a more positive side and maybe provide incentives to industries that reduce emissions. Can you see that this particular question, guys, wide open. You've got to use your imagination, you've got to use your creativity, your knowledge of what a government can and what a government can't do, and it must be doable. It's no sense, guys, coming with a nice, great idea that is not practical and nobody can do. We can add to this even here. We can talk about research that the government can fund or encourage on ways to reduce or recycle industrial emissions. You can't come say now you must stop the rain, you know what I mean? We're not in control of the rain. We are controlled with these things. We are in control of the source of acid rain. The rain never had acid. This acid that's coming in the rain is because of the combination of sulfur dioxide and oxygen in the environment, leading to sulfuric acid. And that's where your acid rain is coming down. So therefore, these are things that a government can possibly do. Good. There can be much more than this, guys. The idea is in a question like this, and when we're discussing questions like this, we want to tell you how to tackle the answer, not to give you the whole answer. You can go into town with this. We move on to the loss of biodiversity. The results of a detailed assessment of South Africa biodiversity revealed the following. 34% of land ecosystems were threatened, while 5% are critically endangered. 82% of river ecosystems are threatened, while 44% of our river ecosystems are critically endangered. And this is partially because of the industrial effluents that is being dumped into the rivers, and partially because of poor sanitation in rural areas where people then dump their sanitation into the water and do their washing, etc., in the water. That causes problems. 12% of marine biozones under serious threat. Obviously, as a result of the river being polluted, the sea then also is going to take a knock as well. 3 to 13%, that should be 3 to 13% estuarine ecosystems in critical danger. Again, estuarine is there where the river and the sea are meeting. That's the estuary, and that's also, obviously, these three are linked to each other. So the rivers are most heavily polluted, and it's getting less as we're getting into the sea, because the sea is vast open because of lots of things. But let's see. The situation is probably because of habitat destruction. We are destroying the habitat. We've spoken about many of this before. We don't have to explain each one again. Overgrazing, monoculture, mining, and poaching. Look at rhino horn poaching in South Africa in 2010 only. This is only now 2 years ago. And remember, in the last 2 years, it's gone even worse. South Africa is home to about 19,400 white rhinos and 1,678 black rhinos. In Mpumalanga, Kruger National Park, 148 rhinos were killed. In Limpopo, 54 were killed. In Northwest, 57. In KZN, 38. And 1%, I think, in the Eastern Cape. Very small amount in the Eastern Cape. But can you see that there's a large amount of, not percent, sorry, these are numbers, not percentage. These are numbers, remember that, very important. If we had to then say it's percentage and you added all this up, it would be more than 100%, right? These are numbers of animals. And again, guys, a classic question coming from here. Give you a diagram like this, ask you to work out percentages of all that are there as well from each one here, or work out the total number, and then from there go to theory. What is this poaching that we are talking about? How can we prevent poaching, etc., etc., etc. With all this, last year only 5 poachers were caught in the act. Some were shot by authorities, while in the first month of 2020 the figure stood at 6. 6 out of all this 200, 300 odd rhino. And remember, 2011, 2012, and beginning of this year, there's been many more reported. But 2013 has seen a lot of busting in terms of the legal side, getting a hold of syndicates, huge syndicates that are involved in rhino poaching. And at the moment, guys, listen to the news, read the newspaper, and you see there's a big debate going on about whether to legalize the hunting of rhino, because what's happening now, because it is banned, it's creating more problems. That is one side of the story. And they're saying that if we unban it, then because it's free, the price will come down. And if the price comes down, then there won't be such a high demand anymore. But the two sides of this debate will continue, and you can choose on which side of the debate you want to be. And do some research, and you'll find out some interesting facts about this. Now, this part deals with indigenous knowledge. That means, what do we know about our own land? And the sustainable use. That means, how can we use this land, these resources that are bestowed upon us by our Creator? How can we use it in a way that can last, sustainable? The first of these is devil's claw. And we thought it's fitting to give you a picture to have a look at what devil's claw, the flower, what the flower looks like, the leaves. They have a distinct, the pink flower and the shape of the leaves are distinct. And this is now coming from there, from the flower coming out. That's devil's claw. And we need to know that this plant is used by traditional healers, etc. And we need to then encourage them to use it in a sustainable manner. Not the whole plant is necessary, only portions of the plant are used to create herbal medicine, etc. And we can then use it sustainably, get the traditional healers to grow this in their own areas, to harvest them themselves, take a little bit at a time and let the others grow, etc. And educate people, pass laws that there must be a permit for this to happen, etc. We move on, and again, the same type of discussion will go for all the rest that we're talking about. The next one is African potato. There's the African potato. The main part of the African potato is the underground stem there that we are seeing here, and from there we can use this for various ailments, etc. The other one there is the hoodia. This is what the hoodia looks like, more like a cactus type of plant, but again a pinkish flower. This grows that way there, and again same story there. The last one is the rooibos, and we know rooibos famous. We're getting tea from there, and some of this rooibos, they are endemic to certain areas of South Africa, in the Cape area especially. Some of the rooibos and the fynbos, they're endemic. That means endemic means they only grow in those areas. So if we use it indiscriminately, then obviously we're going to run out of supply. And because all of these things, initially it was just the traditional healers and people that did it, used it in terms of their own homes, in their families, the villages, etc. And obviously the industries have picked up on this, and they found the ingredient in these medicine or these plants that lead to different, for example, rooibos, they say has a calming effect. It's an antioxidant. That means it helps you to get rid of things that cause cancer, etc., etc. It's healthy. It has no caffeine, so it's not addictive. It doesn't have the side effect, doesn't increase the blood pressure, it does not increase the heart rate, etc. These are the benefits. Now, the market has seen the benefits of these things, and they have then commercialized it. So the hoodia, the African potato, the devil's claw, the rooibos have become commercialized, and now, because it's been commercialized, they've gone to an extensive way in which marketing this product, and there's a bigger demand for these things. Let's look at the questions that follow. Study the passage and answer the questions. The question is on devil's claw. Devil's claw, giving you the scientific name, this should have been underlined. Remember, when you give a scientific name, you must underline it. Is found most commonly on the South African high veld and is believed to cure a variety of illnesses. It does not have an odor, but it contains substances that make it taste bitter. It's a leafy perennial with branching roots, and it thrives in clay or sandy soils. It has secondary root tubers, which are used for medicinal purposes. Devil's claw is a bitter sedative, 1, pain-killing herb, 2, that reduces inflammation, 3, and stimulates the digestive system, 4. I've given those numbers for certain reasons. I'm hoping you're following, so when we come to the questions, we can then go further. So the question is asking now, what is the habitat of devil's claw? You didn't have to study this because it was given there. The South African high veld, clay or sandy soil. Next question says, name 2 medical conditions that can be treated with devil's claw. And if you were following me, you would have got all of these. It cures any pain arising from inflammation, arising from pain, mainly during pregnancy as well. It solves digestive problems. It stimulates the appetite. It is useful to use when somebody has a fever, when somebody has hypertension, high blood pressure. It's useful to soothe sores, rashes, and boils. These are some of the other stories. But remember, the inflammation, the pain, digestive problems, etc., you picked up from the article itself. Name 2 ways in which the habitat of devil's claw plant could become lost or reduced. What's going to cause the loss of habitat here? One is obviously the famous one would be habitat destruction. This thing is growing out in the open. We want to put up a school, a hall, cinema, shopping center, housing section. So we take away that whole habitat, so the devil's claw's natural habitat is taken away. Why? By people using land for other purposes like agriculture, to plant crops, plantation, or building houses. Anyway, that way we can then take it out that way there. Okay? Also, that's one way. This is actually one way. Another one is overuse without replenishing the stock. In other words, we just use it indiscriminately and we're not planting more and more. So overuse and abuse, you can say, or exploitation. Explain how reduction in the number of devil's claw plant can change the energy flow and energy relationship. This is what we are interested in more. If we take this thing out of the equation, how is the environment going to be impacted? First of all, if the devil's claw plant is reduced, the smaller animals or herbivores that eat it will decrease. Always when they ask you any question, even if they give you a food pyramid, whether they give you a food chain, when they ask you, if you take this out, what's going to happen? Look below it, look above it. Because those that are above or below it immediately will be affected first, and then it has a rippling effect. So we are looking at the ones above it now. So the animals that are eating this devil's claw will decrease in numbers. And therefore the carnivores that rely on these herbivores will also decrease in number. And the energy flow through the habitat will be reduced, mainly because the plant that was supplying the energy. Remember, the plants have the ability to photosynthesize. The herbivores, the carnivores, they cannot manufacture food on their own. They're dependent on that plant to manufacture the food. So that is removed. Then obviously this energy flow will be reduced. 2 ways, they want to know 2 ways in which the devil's claw plant can be saved from exploitation. And we discussed some of this while we were discussing it earlier. First of all, by establishing more nurseries to grow the plant. Again, you see this word coming again, legislation on the amounts to be harvested. Collecting only the amount one requires. Don't go and take thousands and you're only going to use hundreds. The others are just going to be wasted. Replanting the main root after the secondary tubers have been removed, because the main ingredient here is from the secondary tubers. So you can replant that main root and that can then regrow. We can also establish nurseries. We can also encourage traditional healers especially to grow the plant in their yards, etc. Okay. With legislation, we can also add monitoring. We can also add to this answer education and awareness. Also important in terms of that. So in a nutshell, guys, if we look at what has been asked in this question, this whole passage could have been replaced by Hoodia. It could have been replaced by African potato. But you notice that the types of questions and the answers would still remain more or less the same. So any one of these resources, and again it could be replaced with our rhino, because that's also a resource that we have and we are exploiting. And we must know why we're exploiting the rhino horn, etc., and how this will affect the ecosystem in what we are doing. And guys, I'm hoping that as we've gone through all of these things, not only have we sharpened the skills of answering questions, but also we have heightened, and I say this again, heightened yours and mine awareness of the plight of the environment, the condition of the environment, and what you and I, ordinary people, can do to reduce the harm that humankind is doing to the planet. With that, I wish you well. Thank you.